All right, this brings us to our next question, which has to do with binaries. You know, race in America is often framed in terms of binaries. For instance, as a black-white conversation framework. What are the ways we need to alter these binaries in this framework? How do we frame conversations about race that go beyond the black-white framework and include Asian Americans and other people of color? And Val, you alluded to this, and you know, about this, that there is state-sanctioned violence against blacks. And it makes me think of my friend Frank Wilderson, who's part of a school called Afro-pessimism. And what they argue is that the ontology of slavery has not ever left African Americans, that it continues to exist. And part of that ontology is you are not a citizen, you are not regarded as human, violence can be done with you to you without justification or provocation, and that you are fungible, you can be sold. And if you look at what has happened and you know what has come to light, which we know has been happening throughout American history in the past year, you can see the strength of that argument. And I think one of the things I feel like in Baltimore that happened was in recognition, like, what do we owe the social contract? What does the social contract owe us? And the social contract does not recognize our lives, then do we actually belong to the society? The other part of this is they talk about in Afro-pessimism, they sometimes link this with colonial settlerism, which is obviously the history of America, against the Red Savage. And sometimes Native Americans are treated like a nation. Obviously you have these treaties, but then those treaties are broken. There was genocide against Native Americans, which is a different condition than slavery. And one of the conditions of Native Americans, I think, is that they are not, their presence as living human beings is not part of the consciousness of America, which is why you can have the Washington Redskins, right? Because it doesn't matter. And so the question is, you know, how do Asian Americans frame themselves along these lines?
So, you know, I also want to kind of touch upon both what Ananya and Linda have said about, you know, an intervention in terms of complicating things, adding nuance. And, you know, the things that they've said, the things that I've said don't fit on Twitter, right? And I think that, you know what I mean? It's like, but anyway, the way that I would, you know, answer this question or throw a thought out is to, you know, refer back to Andrea Smith, who is a scholar who wrote this really brilliant essay called Heteropatriarchy and Three Pillars of White Supremacy. And a very, very quick summing up of what that is that there are definitely binaries and poles in white supremacy in America, okay? And one of them is the anti-black pole, where white people are on one end of the linear equation and black people are at the other, right? And anyone who is not black, including Asians, including Native Americans, including Latinos, can participate in anti-black racism, right? It can benefit from that. And we're positioned above black people on that binary, right? But there's also one that is genocide and land theft, okay? And on that pole, white folks are at the top, Native folks are at the bottom, and anyone who's non-Native can participate in that. And we are positioned above Native Americans. There's also a third one, Orientalism, right? Where Asians, Arabs are always the enemy, we're never from here, and the United States, whoever's American, is constantly at war with us. And on that pole, Asians, Arabs, we're at the bottom, and anyone who's not Asian and Arab can participate in white supremacy against us, okay? And some people would say that there's a fourth pole, you know, the anti-immigrant against Latinos and Chicanos, and I would definitely agree with that. But I bring that theory up to show that, and what's really brilliant about her thesis is she says, if we only recognize one pole at a time, we will not be able to recognize racism and discrimination in other instances. And I think it's really important that we always kind of look at these different poles at all times. And then the further complicated is, of course, intersectionality, right? What about women, people who are queer, who are combinations of all of these identities? So,
Linda?
So I speak a lot from my personal experience, and when I started doing social justice work, in Hmong spaces, I would talk about like queerness and gender and sexuality, and then would be shut down because they only want to speak about Hmongness or like how to like very neutral, like how do we make our community better without really addressing like these identities, politics, right? And then I would go into like LGBT spaces, which is still very currently really white, that doesn't really want to talk about race, doesn't want to talk about ethnicity, class, and that was like 7 years ago, and just struggling around how I understood that I have these multi-identities and I am wanting to create change, and through policy or through community organizing and community education, and not being welcomed or being shut down, and just being able to see like the trends and the themes, in our community in Minnesota historically, systematically, that, like campaigns, for example, like the 2012 campaign where the framework just talked about like love, right? Using love as the defeating the marriage amendment. The marriage amendment, which, would only say that marriage will be valid or recognized between one man and one woman. And me and other Asian American organizing social justice folks who were part of like the 2012 President Obama election, the vote no and vote ID, and the marriage amendment, we struggled a lot as Asian American organizers on many levels, because in the campaign or through like social justice framed by like whiteness, white supremacy, progressive, right, which only had one issue, one message, and that message didn't include us. On the phones, we talked about like the marriage amendment to like vote no, and a lot of like the Hmong folks, the Hmong elders especially, when we say we're voting for love, etc., but we found out that most of the folks like didn't get married because of love. They got married because of arrange or survival and etc., right? And so we were like, oh shit, we need to switch this, right? And so we talked about persecution and like the struggles around, can you be comfortable making the decisions for someone else's life for the rest of their life, right? Will you be part of this, right? And even one guy who was like using religion, started to like shift over, and so being able to recognize how like larger institutions, whether they be white or our own Asian, Asian institutions, like what are their frameworks? Is it inclusive of our experiences? Is it part of the nonprofit industrial complex that continues to put Band-Aid on these like deep wounds, right? And I think that as our roles as social justice and community organizers and scholars, like how are we complicating, how are we inserting and demanding like things to be changed from the usual like powers that funds this work, right? So I think we need to like push and complicate and ask and provide our own solutions that we have this knowledge already for.
Binaries, right? One more in the family of essentialism and nationalism. And I think a lot about June Jordan. You all know that story about June Jordan where she was asked to speak at a rally for the Queer Student Union. And then she's going and she sees over there's another group who's speaking, and that's, she was like, what's that? She was like, the students were like, that's the thing that the Black Student Union organized. And this is her brilliance, right? She says, but this is crazy. You all are fighting for the same idea of freedom, and you'll have two separate rallies is the craziest thing. You should come together because freedom is indivisible. And like, that's the most brilliant concept, right? Because the nature of freedom is that it is indivisible. Of course, it's complicated. I don't think hate speech should have its day. I just don't. I'm not a liberal, I'm a progressive. So, it's true though, right? But I think about June Jordan's exhortation to us to remember that to really invest in coalitional politics, because otherwise, I don't know where we're going to go. And I really think about how in fact, I think of the United Colors model, United Colors Benetton model of diversity, which is, I always see that, that's what gets pushed in institutions all the time, the same sweater, yellow, green, blue, yellow, and we all fit into the same sweater, look. So I'm really interested in fostering, both for myself and for others, who I work with, these amazing women I get to work with, a very unruly sense of difference. It's messy and it doesn't fit in. So, I do also notice that it's easier to come to the table when we're all wearing jeans. So thank you for standing up. I started my 100 sari pact today. Thank you, Prakshi, for joining me. It is, I think, difficult to mark your difference all of the time. I think it's damn difficult. But, and I don't think it's superficial, but I do think that you can take a marker on your body and allow it to sink in the way you walk, the way you move, the way you think, and allow it to really point you towards your own difference and marking it all the time. It's dangerous and it's difficult, but sometimes we take those risks, right? And sometimes, especially because otherwise we can get consumed in the model minority myths that are there. I think, inspired by June Jordan, one of the things I remember is that, sometimes when you live against this kind of pushing back, it can poison your soul. So I'm always trying to invest in practices that are about the joy of brown folk. I really encourage us to think about our own joy. I know that I can't disempower racism, but I do want to say that I'm going to give it a little less power in my heart.